And this was made after the country had kind of been moving in that direction a little bit here. And he says, our government is now taking so steady a course as to show what road it will pass to destruction. To wit, by consolidation first, and then corruption, its necessary consequences. The engine of consolidation will be the federal judiciary, the two other branches, the corrupting and corrupted instruments. So what he's saying here is obviously he's seeing it goes on. There's a lot more he's got to say about that. But what he was seeing at that point was the judiciary was being the engine that was driving these mechanisms, and the other two branches of our government were becoming corrupted and because of that gradual decay that he was concerned with, we see these things taking place, and that's what we've got now. We've got this corrupt system. We have allowed these things to get into place and let them basically run amok. And the problem with the consolidating everything together, seeing we've got this massive federal bureaucracy now that is out of control. It's completely overstepping its authority. It's completely overstepping its bounds of what was intended for it to be of the influence. It's the reason why we have this mess that's going on today in our school systems. We got these cotton picking school boards running around saying that the parents don't have authority over their kids. I mean, come on, what is that? I was listening to the radio yesterday or the day before, dealing with a couple that had a loved one in a hospital and had COVID, and really irrelevant as to what was wrong with them. They were sick, and the family didn't agree with the prognosis and the operations of the hospital they were in, and they wanted to move the loved one out of that hospital to another hospital, and it turned into just a big old fiasco of courts and legalities and dictatorship type authority over a simple decision that is a no-brainer to you and I. It belongs in the hand of the family, not the doctors, not the hospital. It doesn't make any difference if, I hate to belittle things down, but I like to get things to the simple place. If you bring your vehicle to my shop to have it worked on and don't agree with my prognosis of what is going to take to repair that, you have the right to drag that thing out of there and take it somewhere else. What's the difference between our health? What's the difference between buying groceries? See what I'm saying? We have let the government usurp this authority, and somehow we just feel like we got to cave into it. They say, well, no, you can't come in here. You can't see. You want to bet? I'm coming in there. I've heard cases of folks in this pandemic thing they've used to overstep their authority, where they wouldn't let them come see their loved ones that were dying in the hospital. Didn't have anything to do with COVID, but because COVID's going on, you can't come in here. And we've quarantined these people and we isolate them. Now that they're in our facility, it's like a penitentiary. You can't come in and they can't leave. And what is that? This is not a cotton picking communist country. This is the United States of America. And we, the people, have allowed this engine and this corruption to come to a place now, and it's just so gradually crept up with me. It's like one of these guys, I can't remember which one it was talking about the harmless worm and how it gradually just soaks around and ends up consuming its victim, and they don't even realize they're being consumed, and that's exactly what's happened in this country. So we've come to a place to where it's going to take drastic measures in order to correct the course that we're on. And when I say drastic measures, I'm not talking about the fool's bed of taking up arms and going, we're not going to take on the United States military. You're not going to do it. That's a fool's bet. It's nonsense. It's garbage that went on with these rioting and looting and breaking into people's properties and tearing. That's nonsense. That's not American. That's nonsense. So what we're talking about is there are things in place that are kind of radical in their ideas, I guess, but they were set in place by the forefathers. They were set up for the purpose of correcting a rogue government, and when things have gone out of order, and you're starting to hear a lot of talk about a thing called constitutional conventions that is a clause that was put into our Constitution for the correcting of such measures. And you're starting to see some people waking up to these things and realizing that, there is a mode or a means in order to bring a corrective solution to some of these things. But, there's a lot of simple things that we got to put in place, and you talk about these conventions, and then, my question is, okay, we're going to have this convention, but what are we going to talk about here? What are we going to do to correct these situations? How are we going to stop some of this stuff? Because it's not going to be a big sweeping, drastic tear the Constitution up, rip it up, throw it away, and start all over thing. And it's going to take time. It took a long time to get where we are. It's going to take a long time, and we're going to suffer some consequences to change the course of this thing back to. But even Thomas Jefferson was talking about some of these limitations to these judges, because what he's saying in that last quote I was talking about being entrusted for life without the accountability and without the restraints of what was it? Liability. That's the word. Liability and accountability. We have to hold these judges accountable, and we have to hold them liable, and we have to hold them within the strengths of the authority of which they were supposed to be entrusted with in the first place. They're not supposed to be legislators. They're not supposed to be activists. They're supposed to be judging the law. It's pretty basic and simple. But we get it all complicated because we want to get into the emotional aspects of things. We want to get into the little intricate details of all of the argument back and forth and get off of the subject at hand. And, the separation or the independence of our court system is important. They talk about the life terms and not being able to just be, thrown off the bench at any whim. And all of those are true, because we have to have those things in place in order for those people to be able to operate without the pressures of being reelected all the time and all these things. But there's also in the original writings where it talks about their life appointment, it says it was under good behavior, not behavior wasn't the word it was used, but basically what it insinuated was, as long as they were operating and conducting themselves in a proper manner, and they had their emotional intellect, and they were able to operate within the confinements of what they were supposed to be doing, then they were fit to be on the bench. But if they're not, they need to be removed. I mean, for Pete's sake, we got people sitting in the Supreme Court in wheelchairs having to be pushed in and out of the court chambers because they can't even keep their own head setting up straight because their concomitants and their mental facilities are gone, but yet they're not dead, so they're still on the Supreme Court. Really? I don't think that's what the Founding Fathers intended. And if they don't have the cotton-picking fortitude within themselves to say, you know what, I'm an old geezer and I need to leave, then we need to be able to remove them. And there are means for doing that, but we need to simplify those means. We need to set a constitution together to discuss specifically what it is that is required for a justice to sit on the bench. They need to have some kind of requirement qualifications to get there, which we don't seem to have. We need to have some kind of put in place as to how many justices we're going to have on our bench. We need to put it in there because obviously we can't count on people to have common sense enough to know what's right and what's wrong in that area. And then we need to have an avenue of removal from these people, whether it's delegation of duty or whether it's just they're so dang old they need to be gone. I mean, for Pete's sake. And we need to have a checks and balance in order to say, okay, every so many years, we're going to review your behavior and we're going to put it out for public scrutiny, or we're going to, whatever we're going to do in order to be able to hold these people accountable so that we can go in the direction we need to go as a nation. Because, where is it? There was an argument here that Mr. Jefferson made the removal of these folks. Oh, here it is. And this is just in the middle of his quote again. He says, he's talking about term limits for these offices, and he says here that no justice should be withdrawn from their bench whose erroneous biases are leading us to disillusion. It may indeed injure them in fame or in fortune, but it saves the republic, which is the first and supreme law. So what he's talking about is these guys that are going, they're ruling, they're leading the nation into disillusion, and even though it may be harmful to them personally, the removing of them is what's best for this republic, and that should be the supreme law. And that's exactly what we need to be using as a basis for any kind of legislation or ruling as to these justices and their requirements for being on the bench. They must be in the protection of our republic. No other reason. It cannot be political. It cannot be bias. It has to be strict merit and absolute for each and every individual. And this is what is so wrong in our thinking process, because these systems have got so far out of kilter. They are now in our school system. They are now in our media. They are now in our political law machines, and it's corrupted all this thought process because they've corrupted the way people are thinking. They've changed our history, changed our curriculum in our school system. It's all been a gradually eroding away until we now have a common precedent set in our society of people who actually think socialism and communism are acceptable practices of government, and they live within our United States of America, and we wonder why we can't get anything done in order to preserve the union that we live in. And it's been going on for a lot more than a couple of years, and it's going to take a lot more than a couple of years to correct the course. But these are some simple things that could be taking place in these constitutional conventions that need to be established. That we haven't used this because we don't want to upset the apple cart or what have you. And don't misunderstand me. It's not something that it looks like we need to make a normal practice. But when extreme measures are upon us, which they are, then extreme measures are required to correct the course of the ship, because this ship is heading for disaster. If we don't get things turned around, we're going to be the last generation of this nation. And then you get into the things of the Word of God, and people say, well, it's the will of God. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not exactly sure if I can scripturally defend either side of those arguments as far as the position of the United States in the last days of Scripture. However, I do know that the Bible is very clear that those of us that are born again believers, it is our duty by God to occupy until He comes, and that means be good citizens of the nation of which we are citizenry. And we have done what George Washington warned us of doing, and that is to forgot the most important role of our United States government, and that is the role of citizen. We have allowed these dignitaries that we've sent to these high offices to become the bureaucratic dictators of our being. And now we have been enslaved. We say slavery's dead. No, it's not. We are enslaved right now to our bureaucracy we have created. It starts in the very smallest offices of our counties and cities, and it goes all the way to the President of the United States of America. It has been corruption in those offices, and the Supreme Courts and the judiciary has been the worm that has gradually moved into those positions to where today they are legislating from the bench. They are advocating for their own just causes. They are manipulating the things of law around for the purpose of political gain and badgering. They have become wealthy. They have become powerful. And they are some of the most corrupt bodies in the world. That is our United